Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for another offseason preview as we continue diving into each and every NBA team and what they are going to look to accomplish in the 2025 NBA offseason. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the Utah Jazz. If you are a big fan of the Jazz, make sure to smash that like button on today's video and also subscribe to the channel for more NBA draft content, offseason content, everything you're going to need to know about your Utah Jazz will be covered throughout the course of this offseason. If you're a fan of another team, make sure to comment which team below you would like to see an offseason preview for next. I do read every single comment on every single video. Let's get into that video preview here now. What are we going to cover in today's video on the Utah Jazz? We're going to first look at this past season. I think the most important thing for these offseason previews is having a good understanding of where the team currently sits. And the best way to do that is by looking at everything that just transpired this past season, highlighting and recapping some of the main points, the biggest details. And then that way, when we have a good scope, good understanding of where this team is coming from, you can evaluate and look at where they need to go, what kind of steps they're going to take in the not so distant future. We're then going to look at the NBA draft lottery odds. Of course, all Utah Jazz fans are sitting there patiently waiting for the May 12th NBA draft lottery. It's going to be a huge day, one that could really dictate the future of the Utah Jazz franchise. We'll look at NBA draft prospects to consider. We'll talk about a wide range of potential outcomes for the Jazz depending on where their draft pick lands and which prospects could make some sense in their young core that does have some veteran talent around it. We'll look at their NBA free agency situation. Utah, of course, has not been a huge free agent market in the last 30, 40 years, but with Utah, obviously, they have some flexibility, some ways to improve their team if they want to go that route. We'll also cover trade possibilities. I think Utah is one of the more fascinating options where they could either buy or sell, or maybe even do a little bit of both, which would be very interesting. And then we'll also get into the early outlook for next season. Obviously, pretty premature at this point because we don't know exactly what will transpire, how everything's going to play out, but it's kind of a general feel for what next year could look like for the Utah Jazz. So this past season, this is again where we're starting in today's video, the 2024-2025 season recap. The Jazz had the worst record in the NBA. They won just 17 games. They secured themselves the best NBA draft lottery odds, and they did a lot of losing. But it doesn't mean that it was all bad. I do think Will Hardy is a good young coach. I think when he's had competitive rosters with some quality veterans on it, we've seen the benefits of his coaching style, and specifically when he has ball security and guys who can actually defend their position. Will Hardy's been capable of winning games as a coach. But that team was not present this year at all. This was a very young team. Before the year, I talked about how youth makes it really hard to win in the NBA, especially when you're playing rookie point guards, when you're playing second year, third year guys who are not great defenders. Having a litany of young players makes it really, really challenging to win in the NBA, even when you're a great coach. And while I do think Will Hardy's brought the best out of a lot of his players at times, it is still very, very difficult to compete with teams that are playing 26, 27, 28-year-olds nightly, and players who are in the heart of their primes. Or you look at Oklahoma City, one of the youngest teams in the league. Well, that's what makes it so impressive, is that they have so much talent and they're so young and winning games. Utah doesn't have that talent level either that Oklahoma City does. So it's not just an age thing. Obviously, a large part of this too is the actual talent level. The Jazz don't have an MVP caliber player like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They don't have a former top 2 pick like Chet Holmgren. They don't have anyone like Jalen Williams. There's a lot of things on this Utah Jazz roster right now that are pretty lacking. And it shows up specifically in their team defensive rating, where they were the worst in the NBA this past year, despite having what is a lot of size in their front court with Lauri Markkanen, John Collins, and Walker Kessler. They aren't a great defense. A lot of that stems from their ball-contained point-of-attack defense. I think Bryce Sensabaugh, Isaiah Collier, those are some of the worst point-of-attack defenders you can have in the NBA. Collier, I think, misses rotations pretty consistently. Bryce Sensabaugh has some of the worst closeouts in the entire NBA. This team just does not defend very well at all, and that's okay. And Jazz fans, it's going to sound like I'm being very pessimistic right now. This is where having a realistic understanding of where your team is at is really important. There are a lot of ways this team can get better, whether that be through roster construction upgrades or through actual internal development. And if you're being honest with yourselves about the ways that your young players have to get better, Bryce Sensabaugh's closeouts need to be way better. Isaiah Collier needs to be a lot more engaged and focused defensively because he does have the physical tools to be a good defender if he applies himself in that way. I'm still skeptical that he'll ever get to that point, but he does have the tools, right? So you have to be somewhat critical in order to unlock the best versions of your young players on the roster. Lauri Markkanen had a bad defensive season himself this year, but kind of was the same old Lauri Markkanen that we've seen over the last few years. Not quite the all-star caliber version, but did average around 19 points per game this year, was again fairly efficient from the floor. I do think for Lauri Markkanen, one of the hardest things is when he's playing around all these young players, there's not a lot of gravity around him. There's not a lot of scoring around him. Now, the Jazz did have, a few guys flirting with 20 points per game throughout the course of the year. I just think for Lauri specifically, if you had like an elite point guard or a true creator of offense, the version you're going to get out of Lauri Markkanen is going to be so much better. I think back to when Mike Conley was still a Jazz at the end of his Jazz tenure before being traded to Minnesota. Lauri Markkanen would be really benefited by another guy who can actually handle the ball, consistently create offense. People are going to point to Isaiah Collier's assist numbers. Well, yes, raw assist numbers do tell a story. They don't tell the whole story, and I do think the Jazz right now are still missing that lead guard who can be a premier decision maker for them while exerting some scoring gravity to draw attention, draw in double teams, and really exert not only pressure on the rim, but also pressure on defenses out on the perimeter, whether that be coming off of certain actions, handoffs, whatever it may be. I do think the Jazz are still lacking, and I do think it hurts Lauri Markkanen a bit. John Collins had a great year for himself, though, 19 points per game this past year. Shot the ball very efficiently and effectively. And I think for the Jazz specifically, we'll talk about his contract here coming up soon. John Collins really rebuilt a lot of his value this year. And I think that was a huge home run for the Jazz, the ability to bring him in the way that they did. John Collins is like a perfect addition for a rebuilding team because he can put up numbers. He's a fun player to watch, right? Has athletic tools, very talented, can put the ball in the hoop. But he doesn't really drastically change your team's floor or ceiling to the point where trading for him didn't hurt the rebuild at all. It just gives you a veteran player into your locker room. It gives you a veteran player on the court that fans can watch and enjoy play without really hurting the long-term direction of the team, and we saw that this year. Colin Sexton, another guy who had a pretty good season for himself, someone who I thought was probably going to get traded at the NBA trade deadline, ultimately did not get dealt, but with all things considered, I do think Colin Sexton still a valuable piece. He was, of course, part of the Donovan Mitchell deal, was brought over technically via sign and trade along with Lauri Markkanen. That trade, even though, yes, the Cavaliers had the best record in the Eastern Conference, I do think the Jazz have to feel pretty good still about how that trade has aged for them in terms of the draft capital that they got from that deal. They now were able to flip a few of those picks for the assets from the asset from the Phoenix Suns in 2031. You got Lauri Markkanen, who's obviously their best player, so I think all in all, the Jazz should still be pretty comfortable, pretty confident in their package they got for Donovan Mitchell. You look at Walker Kessler. I think, again, this was a big build-back year for him. You look at his season after the World Cup last year where he struggled quite a bit coming in. I don't think that was unexpected, honestly, when it comes to playing a full offseason of international basketball, the toll that takes on your body, and obviously just wasn't right last year. I think Walker Kessler had a pretty big bounce-back year, a pretty substantial improvement this year, and then also they kind of messed around with him shooting some threes in the name of tanking. That obviously helped, but it also might be a good step forward for the expansion of his overall offensive game. Now, for Walker Kessler to be a good NBA player, I don't think he has to shoot threes, but if he ever adds that to his game where he's a threat to take one, maybe two a game, that is still a benefit to your offense overall. I think in terms of spacing, certain kind of actions you can run, it adds in a little bit of a wrinkle with a pick and pop game maybe if the Jazz want to use that going forward. Again, I'm not suggesting that they will. I'm not saying that they need to, but it is an interesting development that we should continue watching for over the next couple of seasons. Keontae George, this is going to be one of the hot button names. This is going to be one where I just don't see it with Keontae George. I never really did, even in his draft class. I just think he's a low efficiency creator bet, and I really think this type of player is meant to be an off the bench scorer. I just don't know. For Utah specifically, like they had a lot of young players playing this year. Keontae George, you can't guard really, and the offense is just not efficient enough with him leading it, in my opinion. So again, I still think the Jazz, like I talked about when I was discussing Lauri Markkanen, are still missing premier backcourt players, and they're missing guys who can really exert pressure on team defenses to the point where not only, yes, they can go off for 20 points, but they can do it efficiently and lead the team to wins by being the primary scoring option. And I just don't think the Jazz have that right now with their collection of young pieces in the backcourt. Isaiah Collier, I know Jazz fans really love him. Again, I was very low on him in his draft class. I believe I had him 28th on my final big board for the 2024 NBA draft cycle. And throughout the whole process, I was just not a huge Isaiah Collier fan, primarily for the defensive concerns, but I also think the lack of reliable pull-up shooting and jump shooting from the perimeter in general is going to be something that does limit his long-term ceiling. While even, yes, the passing at times is brilliant, teams are going to realize the longer we get into his career, we don't have to send two to this guy. We don't have to chase over screens at all. We can just comfortably go under, force him into long pull-up jump shots that he's going to hit maybe 30% of the time. And you're going to live with that if you're a team defense in the NBA. Cody Williams had a really bad rookie season. Now, I am still withholding hope for Cody Williams. I was relatively high on him in his draft class, and I always kind of looked at him as a long-term project pick. There is a lot to work with here in terms of feel for the game. Now, one thing that I think Jazz fans can attest to is at times it feels like he's almost invisible out there. I think this is an area for Will Hardy where I want Cody Williams to start exerting himself more, and I want him to become more of a focal point for this team, even if it doesn't mean it's going to be successful or good. I think kind of instilling that, hey, go get a bucket, go exert your talent, exert your skill set into the game a little bit more would be good. Now, listen, his brother Jalen Williams for Oklahoma City was a late bloomer. I still think Cody Williams, with his size, length, and skill set, we saw him really succeed at Colorado a year ago in college. I do think Cody Williams can be a quality NBA player. I just think it's going to be a road to get there yet. Kyle Filipowski flashed big time. I really loved what I saw from Kyle Filipowski this year. Everything I kind of highlighted from his couple of seasons of college basketball playing next to Derek Lively and for the Duke Blue Devils in general, where his playmaking feel as a big man, his ability to push in transition, make reads off of a live dribble, some shooting prowess, just a little bit of everything. And it's a mixed bag that's really fun to watch and really provides a lot of functionality for the Utah Jazz. So I'm very optimistic about Kyle Filipowski's future. I think he had a really, really strong rookie season for himself, especially given the fact that he slid a little bit on draft night into the second round. Wasn't expecting that going into the 2024 NBA draft, but I'm really glad he fell in a spot in Utah where they're going to give him that runway to really build up as a player. And then Taylor Hendricks' injury. First of all, let's hope for the best for him. Let's hope he comes back healthy, is able to get on the court for a while. I really love watching Taylor Hendricks play, and I want to see him get back healthy, get back right, and I think he can still be a mainstay long-term piece here for the Utah Jazz moving forward. So when it comes to the NBA draft lottery, here are the odds for the Utah Jazz. They have the best odds at a top 4 pick. 52.1% chance to pick in the top 4, so slightly better than a coin flip odds to be picking in the top 4. Remember, the lottery is only dictating the top 4 picks in the draft. They do have a 14% chance to land pick number 1, which would ultimately provide them Cooper Flake. The Utah Jazz have never had the first overall pick as an organization, so what a time it would be now to ultimately get that pick, finally have a crack at the top spot in the NBA draft. And what a year it would be to land Cooper Flake for Utah. This would really spearhead their rebuild in a winning direction, something they've struggled to do in the last few years. Obviously, after trading away Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, they did give up on a core that was winning a lot of games for them year in, year out, without maybe that championship upside that everyone was hoping for. Obviously, in Utah, I think if you do get Cooper Flake, if you get the first overall pick this year, you really take a huge step forward in the winning department, both in the short term, and your championship upside elevates significantly. So this is a really important NBA draft lottery for them on May 12th this year. Don't forget as well, they do own the Minnesota Timberwolves pick, which will be pick 21 in the 2025 draft. And at the very worst for their own selection, they will be as low as pick 5. So they are guaranteed a top 5 pick. They have about a 47.9% chance at pick number 5, which is again the lowest they could possibly pick, but a very good chance still to be in the top 4. Over 52% chance at that, and another first round pick as well via Minnesota. So who are some NBA draft prospects to consider with their own selection? I have a plethora of names here, 7+ players who I think the Jazz will be strongly considering, and it of course will depend on their draft slot. If they get the first overall pick, Cooper Flagg is their no-brainer decision. If they get pick number 2, someone like Dylan Harper could be a home run selection for them. Could be that lead creator bet for Rutgers this past year. Really dictated their offense and was pretty beneficial to their overall team. A team that was not that good holistically, struggled quite a bit with fellow 5-star freshman Ace Bailey on the floor. Dylan Harper had a +8 net rating, whereas Ace Bailey had a negative net rating. So Rutgers actually got outscored while Ace Bailey was on the court, whereas when Dylan Harper was on the floor, they were better than their opponents by 8 points per 100 possessions, which I do think is a pretty meaningful statistical difference between Harper and Bailey from this past year. Harper is clearly the better player than Ace Bailey both now and in the future. Harper has a lot of meaningful attributes that I think are going to help him a ton in the NBA. His ability to read the entire floor, specifically the weak side. He does a very good job getting the ball over the top of the defense, exercising that playmaking vision and positional size at about 6'6". Dylan Harper is a very good prospect, and I would love to see him in Utah. I think even if the Jazz don't get the first pick, pick number 2 would go a long way in moving this franchise forward and putting that building block backcourt player around Lauri Markkanen, for example. Ace Bailey, he's the upside pick. This is the kind of pick that I could see Danny Ainge really drooling over and considering if the Jazz get pick number 3 or pick number 4. I don't think Ace Bailey is going to be very good early in his career. I think he's going to really struggle early in his career, to be completely honest with you. Now, playing next to a guy like Isaiah Collier could help him, where Collier obviously makes a lot of high leverage passes and creates a bunch of potential assists. That kind of player could help Ace Bailey quite a bit, but if you're trying to unlock Ace Bailey's potential as a shot creator, shot maker, someone who can attack off the dribble from the perimeter, you have to be willing to accept there's going to be a lot of bumps in the road. There's going to be a lot of struggles, a lot of 7 for 20 nights from the floor, a lot of bad things early in Ace Bailey's career, probably. Now, doesn't mean the upside's not there. It doesn't mean he can't succeed in the NBA, but it's going to be a road, okay? And it's going to be one that has bumps in it along the way, and that's okay. Remember, you're drafting 18, 19-year-old kids. That's part of the process here. And for the Jazz, losing long-term for the next couple of years doesn't hurt them either, because they could be positioning for the 2026, 2027 NBA drafts yet if they do go with Ace Bailey. But again, it's a process. VJ Edgecombe, I think, is another guy who has a ton of perceived upside. I do think there's going to be some challenges along the way for him really realizing some of that potential when it comes to his ball handling, creation for himself and for others. I just think that a pretty significant decline compared to someone like Dylan Harper in this draft, whereas Harper, I think, is the more realized version of that upside and more functional basketball skills, whereas Edgecombe has all the athletic gifts and traits and tools that you're kind of looking for and could definitely develop, right? This is, again, the thing. When you're drafting 18, 19-year-old kids, you're looking at a 4 or 5 year runway for what they're going to be by the end of their rookie contract, not at the beginning of it. So this is where getting to know the players, getting to know the prospects, and having them in for workouts, that's when you start to buy into not only who the player is currently as a basketball player, but who the guy is when it comes to work ethic, mentality, all of those things. And obviously Utah will value all of that when it comes to their ultimate draft positioning, whether it's pick 1, pick 2, pick 3, pick 4, or pick 5. Trae Johnson out of Texas, probably not going to be a Utah Jazz, but I did want to consider him here. He shoots the ball at a very high clip and a very high rate, and that would be very beneficial. I think as another play finishing type there in Utah, I don't think it really solves a lot of their current problems or concerns, but it would be unique. I did include 2 big men as well. Now, I don't think this is the biggest positional need at all for Utah, but if you look at some of the best teams in the league right now, they do play 2 big men. Cleveland does it. You look at Oklahoma City with Hartenstein and Holmgren. The benefits of having 2 7-footers, especially skilled 7-footers on the court, is very, very real. So someone like Kamen Maluach, listen, he's probably not going to coexist next to Walker Kessler, but if you want to split their minutes evenly, you could have 2 big-time rim-to-rim, impact screener, dive, roll men, rim protectors on the court at all times. You could have one of those 2 all game long. Foul trouble doesn't matter. We're going to play Maluach if Kessler gets in foul trouble. Or, hey, Maluach, in the 22 minutes you're out there tonight, go and try and block everything. And if you get 4 or 5 fouls, we don't care. We have Walker Kessler. It is a huge benefit for Utah, and I do think it would really strengthen their backup center spot in a way that, listen, people are going to say, well, why would you draft a backup center in the top 5? It's not really about backup center. It's about, hey, this is 24 minutes of pretty big impact. Maluach this past year for Duke had a plus 53 net rating. Remember, Ace Bailey had a negative net rating. Kamen Maluach, when he was on the floor for Duke, the Blue Devils were 53 points per 100 possessions better than their opponent. That's about 20 points more effective than Cooper Flagg was for Duke. It's about 20 points per 100 possessions better than what Con Knippel was doing for the Blue Devils. So Maluach, is not just that Duke was an outlier team this year, which they were in some regards, but Maluach was an outlier to the outliers, which is what's so incredible about the freshman season he had for Duke, and the impact was really, really impressive. Derek Queen for Maryland, I think, could be a player who fits with both Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler. Gives you more lineup versatility in terms of who you want to play with who. Obviously, the Jazz have liked some of their bigger lineups with Lauri at the 3. Derek Queen could fit in as your 4 or 5, depending on what you want to do and how you want to play, which gives Will Hardy more lineup versatility. So I think there's a wide range of prospects to consider. Obviously, Cooper Flagg being the headliner, Dylan Harper in at the number 2 spot, but otherwise, bigs could be in play. A shooter like Trae Johnson, or some of those upside bets like Ace Bailey and VJ Edgecombe kind of rounds out that top 7 category right now for who the Jazz might consider on draft night. When it comes to that Timberwolves pick at pick number 21, don't worry, we're going to have some prospects to talk about here. Nolan Traore could be a creation bet, someone who a year ago was looked at as a potential top 5 pick in the 2025 class. Just hasn't had the year playing in France this past year, where your true shooting percentage is really low, but the eye test still suggests a lot of upside. He's very comfortable with the ball in his hands, gets downhill with ease, very comfortable playing in the pick and roll, utilizes pocket passes extremely well. So if you're looking at Walker Kessler's development long term, if you look at the way Ivica Zubac has developed for the Clippers with that little 12 to 14 foot push shot, little baby hooks, if you want Walker Kessler to take meaningful offensive development forward, it's not just about that three-point shot, which we talked about earlier. It's about his touch. It's about getting him shots in the middle of the floor. One of the best ways to beat drop coverage is have a downhill guard like Nolan Traore and have a big man with touch who can finish some of the plays out of the pocket. And I think for Walker Kessler, that's where you're hoping that next step of development really comes, and someone like Traore could help him unlock that quite a bit as a creation guard bet. Ben Seraph, another creator who could help them quite a bit. Left-handed, I think, would do a very good job of spraying the ball out. And I think right now, even though the question for him in the swing skill is that outside perimeter jump shot, I feel pretty comfortable with his mechanics and footwork and fundamentals and the ability to get to spots on the floor and look to be a scorer, that I would be very comfortable taking that kind of bet on Ben Seraph somewhere in the early 20s. In fact, I'd probably pick him even before pick 20. But for the Jazz, if he's on the board at 21, it could make some sense. Liam McNeely could be a good buy low candidate almost at 21. Just did not have the year you'd hope for at UConn, but go back to his high school film playing with Cooper Flagg at Montverde Academy. I think playing next to creators of offense could be another interesting play finishing type, and especially helping the Jazz on the wings, where I think just getting more positional size, some rebounding value, which Liam McNeely brings, would help the Jazz quite a bit as well. And if they get Cooper Flagg at pick 1, drafting Liam McNeely, reuniting those two would be very unique as well. Hugo Gonzalez playing in the ACB this year for Real Madrid hasn't had a ton of minutes, hasn't had a ton of opportunity because of how competitive his team is, one of the better European teams. And of course, teenagers typically don't get a lot of run in those kind of team contexts. So Hugo Gonzalez's numbers don't really suggest he's worth a first-round pick in a lot of ways, but when you watch him play, you do see the combination of size, skill, feel, positionless playmaking, I think there's a lot of benefit Hugo Gonzalez can bring as an upside long-term pick for the Utah Jazz. Then you have a couple of play finisher and perimeter defenders in Rasheer Fleming, Noah Penda. Penda obviously doing it in the LNB Pro A League. Rasheer Fleming in the A10 this past year for St. Joseph's. They're different prospects. Fleming a little bit bigger, more of a true kind of small forward / power forward, whereas Noah Penda is maybe kind of your just natural combo wing, shooting guard, small forward kind of positionally. Penda's probably a little bit more comfortable guarding the ball out on the perimeter at this point in isolation, whereas Fleming can be a more impactful team defender while still being able to go out and guard on the perimeter. I think the really ideal outcome for Rasheer Fleming would be a Tari Eason type of player. Now, I don't think Fleming is quite as athletic as Tari Eason was coming out of LSU. I think Tari Eason was just a better prospect than Rasheer Fleming as both a play finisher, driver of the basketball, and defender and rebounder. But I do think Fleming has a ton of value that he can bring to a team as a standstill catch and shoot knockdown guy, and a on-ball / off-ball team defender. Penda, I think you're really getting that value for the perimeter defense, which I do think would really help bolster this Jazz defense as a whole, which is one of their biggest concerns. Obviously, we've already talked about that. Alex Caravan is a connective play finisher type. You always think about the way that Joe Ingles had impact in Utah. I don't think Caravan's going to quite fill that kind of role where he can also run ball screens and stuff, but I do think more of a comparison to Nick Batum would be the way that I would look at Alex Caravan. Probably not going to be the Jazz pick at 21, honestly, if I had to bet, but Adu Thiero could be. Had a really, really great year for Arkansas before missing the end of the season and NCAA tournament. Shot over 60% on two-pointers as a wing, and got to the free throw line a ton. He's a very instinctive, natural cutter, has a ton of physical tools, very functional athletically, someone who I think is going to have a very good career in the NBA. And I think for the Jazz, if you can get him at 21, it would be a home run pick for sure. Moving on to their NBA free agency situation, this is where the getting gets good for Utah. They're projected a current maximum of about $8.8 million in cap space, which means they don't have a ton of flexibility, and it's more likely with some of their cap holds and player options and everything considered that they'll actually have negative cap space. Now, they do have access to the non-tax mid-level exception. They could still go out and improve their team in free agency, whether that be through sign and trade or through, again, that mid-level exception number. There's obvious ways for teams to get around some of the cap situations, especially when you aren't up against the luxury tax, when you're not an apron team like Utah isn't at this point. That John Collins player option he will probably opt into. It would be hard to imagine him opting out of that $26.58 million figure. And the Jazz do have 15 players under contract, which kind of does complicate things a little bit, because if you do want to sign someone with that mid-level exception, or if you do want to go out and commit money to someone via sign and trade, you're going to have to send some players somewhere else. You have basically a full roster under contract at this point, but they do have some non-guarantees that they could get off of. Someone like KJ Martin, Svi Mikhailuk, Johnny Juzang, Jaden Springer. I think out of everyone, KJ Martin would be the most likely to go given his contract size and the fact that it's fully non-guaranteed, as is Svi Mikhailuk. I think those two players are probably at the top of the pecking order in terms of expendability for Utah in order to open up roster spots and open up avenues to improve their team. Now, the other thing is they could ultimately include KJ Martin or Svi Mikhailuk in some kind of sign and trade too if they wanted to go that way. So they have optionality on if they want to keep KJ Martin, Svi Mikhailuk on roster and maybe try and push back the guarantee date to work out some kind of sign and trade, give their team that they're making some deal with flexibility to get off of that money completely. Very unique possibilities here for Utah. But I think those non-guaranteed contracts were really essential to talk about. And of course, they do have movable contracts as well. We'll talk a little bit more about this later in the video. But Lauri Markkanen obviously could not get traded this past year because of his extension. He is trade eligible now this offseason. So Lauri Markkanen could be a name to watch for via trade. Colin Sexton, a name that definitely could be a name to watch for via trade. Someone like Orlando would make a lot of sense for Sexton. Jordan Clarkson probably doesn't get dealt. I don't think the value around the league is enough for him to really warrant an actual trade. Maybe get a second round pick, and for Utah, who already has so many young players, I don't know if they'll value that compared to just having Clarkson's veteran leadership and veteran kind of mentality on the roster. But I don't know. It's just something worth considering as a potential trade chip. So here are some NBA free agents that could make some sense for the Utah Jazz. Obviously, Cam Thomas. As you can tell here, I went very restricted free agent focused for the Jazz. While I don't think they're going to be a huge free agent suitor, someone like Naz Reid, someone like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, some players who have really broken out into roles in the NBA, while they would help the Jazz, I don't see them being the team that would ultimately land the services of those guys. If those guys are going to move teams, it's going to either be for a huge money contract somewhere to a team that has cap space, or it's going to be to a contending team looking to win with them on their roster as the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th guy, whatever it may be. So instead, we're going to look at restricted free agents, basically second draft options, guys who could really benefit either by a change of scenery or that the Jazz feel like would be huge time additions as young pieces into their roster. Cam Thomas obviously can really score the basketball. The Nets go into this offseason with max cap space. Very likely will keep Cam Thomas. I'd be surprised if he does switch teams, but the Jazz, I think if you're looking for backcourt improvements and another scorer who can really put the ball in the hoop, Cam Thomas would check some of those boxes for this team. Jonathan Kuminga obviously would be a prime second draft candidate. just does not fit in Golden State. And I've had my concerns about him in Golden State for the last 2-3 years. A lot of people met me with criticism about that, saying, well, why don't you believe in the upside? He's one of those very valuable forward types who can do a little bit of everything and has a ton of upside. It's because he doesn't have the feel to play in Golden State. And I think for Utah, it's a much different team context. It's a much different team philosophy and style of play. It's not as cerebral in Utah as it is in Golden State. Golden State's such a cerebral offensive system, and I think Kuminga could thrive in a more simple, a little bit dumbed down offensive context. It doesn't mean that's going to necessarily be a worse offensive context. I think at times Golden State could benefit by simplifying their offense in moments. But at the same time, I do think for Kuminga, someone who has struggled to really adapt and play his game in that kind of setting, moving to Utah in a new opportunity, change of scenery, could really benefit him a lot. Santi Aldama, I mean, the Jazz love size. He could be a really good get into their front court, but I ultimately don't think they're going to land him. And I do think Josh Giddey will ultimately stay in Chicago, although this is the kind of player who could really help Lauri Markkanen as a facilitator, help increase their pace quite a bit, get up and down the court a little bit more often. Josh Giddey, I do think, would benefit Utah, but probably not to the level that it's worth paying him $25 to $30 million a year anyway. So with that in mind, they probably, out of all these four candidates, probably go after Jonathan Kuminga the most. I think positionally makes the most sense for him as a potential addition to the Utah Jazz and what they're currently lacking at this point. But if they ultimately don't go after any of these free agents, it wouldn't be the most shocking thing either to me. Now, they do have two potential paths when it comes to trades. They could make a buy now approach. They could also sell now, or they could do a little bit of both, right? We talked about Colin Sexton, some landing spots for him. I think Orlando's one that continues to jump out to me as a potential spot for him to go without really jeopardizing the Magic's team defense too much, but helping their offense a bit out on the perimeter from that guard spot. He could be someone they trade, but in the same week, they could also make a buy now trade where, hey, we're sending out Colin Sexton, but now we have more minutes at the guard spot. Why don't we go after someone like Trae Young or LaMelo Ball, two of the top names who could become available? And listen, Danny Ainge is always looking for opportunities. Everyone thinks about Danny Ainge as this tank, draft, develop guy. Obviously did it with Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. Found a ton of success through trades. But one thing he's also done is bought at the right times. You think about trading for Kevin Garnett, bringing in Ray Allen, building that big three in Boston that ultimately won a title in 2008. Danny Ainge was behind all of that. And while, listen, Utah is a rebuilding team at this point, they did express interest in Damian Lillard a few off seasons ago when he became available. And I do think Damian Lillard would have really helped this team a lot, especially in the backcourt, next to Lauri Markkanen, next to some of the core pieces that the Jazz already have in place. If you have an all-star caliber guard there, it's going to completely change the way the team looks in a good way. And that's what Trae Young or LaMelo Ball could do. Two really high-volume three-point shooting guards who can create offense for others. I think Trae Young, one of the best passers in the entire NBA. This is the type of player that would really help Lauri Markkanen flourish. I think it would really elevate Walker Kessler's game and would really maximize Walker Kessler's value as a screen and roll big specifically. Obviously, we saw John Collins and Trae Young find success together in Atlanta. The Jazz and Hawks have done business before. Now Landry Fields just got fired, so new GM, new kind of direction there in the front office for Atlanta. And I don't know if Trae Young's necessarily going to be available, but the Jazz have a bunch of draft picks. They have a bunch of ways to make trades if they want to. Trae Young would be a really interesting target for them. LaMelo Ball, if the Hornets do decide to pull the trigger on trading him, I would not recommend that for Charlotte. But if the Jazz could scoop in and jump in and get LaMelo Ball at this point of his career with a rookie contract extension already in place, that would be an awesome situation for the Jazz long term. Jaden Ivey, probably not someone who will actually be available, but I wanted to include him just given the fact Detroit has flourished this season. Jaden Ivey obviously out with an injury, hoping for him to get back healthy very soon. This could be a unique time for Utah to try and buy on his potential former top 5 pick in his own draft class. They could also go the other way, right, and sell on Lauri Markkanen, trade him, try and maximize more draft picks, try and really get your return for Donovan Mitchell to be absurd in terms of draft picks. Kind of like what Brooklyn did with Kevin Durant, right? They traded Kevin Durant for Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, all these draft picks, and then they also traded Mikal Bridges for more draft picks. Utah could kind of follow that approach a bit. Trade Lauri Markkanen, get off that contract that you extended him on and try and get a ton of value. Now, I don't think this is the offseason to really do it. I kind of think they missed their max window on Lauri Markkanen. If they would have traded him before his contract extension at a smaller, more team-friendly number, especially with the new CBA, they could have gotten more for him, but he still is going to hold value around the league. So I do think the Jazz have two potential paths here. They might not choose either. They might just kind of keep their roster, keep drafting, keep developing internally, and that might be okay too, but I wanted to cover these as possible outcomes or options for the Jazz front office to consider going forward. Then we'll look at their early 2024-2025 season outlook. An opportunistic buy now could drastically improve this team. That would be a Trae Young, LaMelo Ball. This team would get way, way better very quickly. This would give them a really meaningful pick and roll combination, pick and pop combination, and it would drastically improve their team. Now, trading for Trae Young or LaMelo Ball is not going to help the team defense very much, so there's going to be other things you have to figure out. It's not like, oh, all of a sudden the Jazz go from terrible, worst team in the league to contender, but they would be in that playoff mix, which would be interesting given all of their future draft picks, which do create other opportunities for trades. Obviously, they have one of those Suns picks. They have picks from Minnesota. They got picks all over the board, right? So the Jazz can definitely be aggressive in making moves if they want to. And that lottery pick positioning may dictate their aggression now. If they get the first overall pick, you imagine them adding Cooper Flag, and then they say, well, we can line up a trade with some of our other draft capital to go out and get Trae Young or go get LaMelo Ball. You might be envisioning a lineup with Lauri Markkanen, Cooper Flag, Walker Kessler, and Trae Young on the floor. That looks and sounds pretty darn good to me. Now, I do think the safest bet to make for next year is that they win 23 to 28 games. That's pretty significant improvement, 6 to 11 wins, possibly more than they had this past year. I do think the Jazz are still going to be bad, but I do think Lauri Markkanen has a better year than he just had. And I think as their team progresses, matures a little bit, and they make some improvements this offseason with another top 5 pick, that they will just naturally be a bit better than they were a year ago. Again, I think the biggest thing for Utah, the future draft picks, equal opportunity. It gives them flexibility. It gives them potential trades to make. It gives them ways to get other assets that they want. You can tell they bet against Phoenix in the trade that they made for the Suns pick in 2031. I think those opportunities are going to continue to present themselves. They have a very creative front office, a front office that I think is pretty smart, knows what they're doing. Now, it's hard to still improve this team drastically year over year, especially with how torn down they were from the rebuild. But I do think the Jazz are trending in the right direction. Long-term in the lottery might help them a ton this year as well. I really hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, hit that notification bell as well, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.